Guys,
How you guys liking the new weather, the fall weather? No more heat.
no more heat. Maybe
In
we
the
got to bring
cold.
heat onto the show.
Yeah, make
Yes.
make it hot.
Welcome back to another episode of Popcorn Lore. This week we're going to do a double feature. So we'll have episode
Memento.
Memento and an episode on the movie we're going to talk about today, which is what is it, Aaron?
The Boy and the Beast.
Awesome. Cue the music.
Cue the music.
I just have to be stronger than he owes him, right? All the rest is just for show anyway.
The Lord sets high standards. You know that. You had one apprentice. How long did he last?
A month? A week? No, a day.
Not even a whole day. Just the morning.
Yeah, well, he was a crybaby.
Beggars can't be choosers. I know. While we're here, why don't you find yourself a human and make him your apprentice?
Hey, it's not a bad idea.
And we're back.
Woo!
Magic, magic. Okay, so today's feature is The Boy and the Beast. So it was a feature that Aaron picked. You want to elaborate a little bit on that, Aaron?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of I guess you'd say the animation director of this movie and just anime in general. So I think that's been touched on a couple times. TJ had asked for permission even to watch Princess Mononoke, so
Right.
I I had to I wanted to be true to that, and I wanted to talk about one of his movies. I'm a big fan of his. Uh, and I've watched some of his movies for a while. And something that was kind of cool about this one in particular, and it's a theme obviously, which we'll discuss on later, is this is the first time rewatching this particular movie after having a, a, a son, and obviously the movie hit very, very differently. So
Yeah.
that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk a little bit about this movie and go over it a little bit. So that was my reasoning for it. And I also wanted you guys, like, I think it's probably a movie you guys probably wouldn't typically watch. So I wanted to kind of expose you to him and just get your feelings on everything and what you felt. So
Awesome, awesome. And what about yourself, Tony? Did you know about this movie prior to Aaron's?
Well, like I said in previous episodes, I haven't really watched animes all that much.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I haven't even watched enough to compare it to other animes, but I enjoyed the movie. I guess it's this type of movie is kind of like a samurai training movie with the student with the apprentice and the master.
Mhm.
And I'm sure it's not the first one that was made like this.
Mhm.
no, it's the
So
first one.
oh, it's the first one. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like I'm sure
Information in
I'm
cinema,
sure
Tony.
this is
Get with the
even though,
program.
yeah, like I'm sure this is even though I haven't really seen other types of this genre, but I'm sure like this is an established genre, and it's my first time watching this type of anime. I enjoyed it, and it does touch upon one of the subjects is what Aaron mentioned with the father son. I feel it also touches on other subjects, which like for example, like teenagehood,
hmm
and I'll talk about. And like overall the movie, yeah, it was very good, very entertaining. It took place the human world was in Shibuya, which I've been to one, so that was nice
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know
to feel
that. That's I'm
yeah,
gonna talk about that a little bit. So
yeah,
we'll save that. That's awesome, actually.
yeah. So yeah, and having two worlds, the human world and the beast world, I found that was pretty cool. And
Nice.
ultimately, what touched me about the movie was like the ultimate sacrifice that Kuma Tetsu did at the end, transferring himself into the sword slash spiritual entity would ultimately reside in the boy.
Mm.
So yeah, overall, I was satisfied with this movie. But yeah, like compared to Princess Mononoke, it's like a very different type of movie with
Definitely.
different subjects.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. What about you, TJ?
Yeah, it's the first time that I ever watched an anime by this director. I really like the animation, especially like the still frames, and there was a lot of interesting angles. I like the fact that like a lot of the animation in the movie was like almost like a painting, the background, and then like there was animation that was happening while the painting was kind of like in a still frame. So I
Mm,
really like that aspect of the movie. I like some of the themes for sure. It's definitely a coming of age film for sure.
yeah,
And yeah, just like a lot of themes I feel of being a dad, manhood, being a dad, finding your way, and kind of like belonging. I think is a lot of
yeah.
things of that from what I felt in the movie. But before just diving in, I wanted to take a look at the films that were also released in the same year. So this is 2015. And correct me if I'm wrong, it is 15, correct, Aaron?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I
correct.
saw it in the list.
Okay,
Uh,
okay, perfect. So it's the film I think that a lot of people will remember is The Revenant was released in 2015. So that's with Leo. You also had La La Land, you had Whiplash, you
um,
had Birdman, and you had Mulholland Drive. I don't know how.
no, that's
Mulholland.
2001.
Oh, Mulholland. Oh, okay. My apologies. Actually, not the same name. I'm looking at the wrong. I'm looking at the list here on the web, and it's the wrong movie in the list. But yeah, those are some of the movies that were featured, and obviously you have this movie here. So without further ado, do you guys remember like this year for movies or
Whiplash really
stuck out?
really touched me, and this is one of those AMC movies like that. I would like to go to AMC, which is like the Montreal Forum, because they have like 18 theaters, and like half of them is just like smaller independent movies.
Mhm.
So sometimes they show anime, sometimes they show Indian movies, sometimes they show Chinese movies, and Whiplash was one of those smaller movies that started off there. And yeah, that movie really marked me.
Yeah, that movie marked me as well because of the music school aspect,
Yeah,
something that I've been through. So I kind of can relate to a lot of the stuff in that film.
but Birdman was very good too.
Birdman was very
Yeah.
good too, and The Revenant too was a very good movie as well. And I really liked Tom Hardy's role in that as the villain. He did a good job with that. What about you, Aaron? Do you remember
I,
this
I
year?
I can't say I remember it per se, but I do remember watching some of the movies from it. Like it was a big movie for blockbuster, a big year for blockbusters. Like there was a Star Wars movie, there was a
Avengers, I think, as well.
Avengers movie, yeah, there was a Fast and Furious movie. I'm pretty sure The Martian, that was a good one.
Oh,
That
yeah.
I
Oh, Ridley
I think
Scott, yeah.
I think I watched. I definitely watched Star Wars, that's for sure. And I definitely watched Avengers, that's for sure. And I probably, knowing me, saw the Fast and Furious movie too, because I'm a sucker for those movies and turning my brain off and watching that one. That one I think was actually after uh, Paul Walker passed away too. I'm pretty sure that was the one where Paul Walker passed away too. So yeah, I suppose I do remember going to see a bunch of blockbuster movies that year. That's primarily what I remember.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, let's talk more about this film. So, you can take us away, Aaron.
Awesome. So yeah, so just getting into the movie itself. So before I talk about the movie, I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the director. So one of the reasons I obviously picked this movie is I'm a big fan. The animation director's name is Mamoru Hosoda. So he's these days obviously he's got a ton of accolades. He's been involved with a lot of different famous animation studios and animes. He comes from very humble beginnings. I think his mom was like a tailor or something like that, and his dad was an engineer. And then, shockingly, or not so shockingly, if you had to guess, TJ, his main inspiration for anime was probably
Miyazaki.
Miyazaki. And something that I'll talk about in the lore, obviously, is that they end up having a interesting relationship. So I'll get into that momentarily. And it's kind of funny because that was his like inspiration and his childhood dream, and things didn't necessarily go the way he planned. So
Right.
he uh, he apparently felt inspired by one of the movies, like Hayao Miyazaki movies or the Studio
Mhm.
Ghibli movies. So and that ultimately kind of like inspired him essentially to kind of pursue art. So ultimately he ended up getting like majoring in painting actually. After he ended up graduating, he was working on something I guess in his spare time, and then apparently it was so impressive that it actually ended up getting him a job at Toei Animation. For anybody that knows, Toei is like a huge animation company. They're the ones that do like Dragon Ball, for example, Digimon. Um, those are like super mainstream ones, but they do everything like Saint Seiya. There's a ton of like One Piece. They do a ton of really super famous anime. So it's pretty cool. And he actually ended up working on a lot of those, Sailor Moon. So after he ended up getting into Toei, he had also applied to ultimately work with Hayao Miyazaki at Studio Ghibli, who, as we had previously watched the movie for, was the director of Princess Mononoke, Mononoke Hime. So um, he was essentially so successful and he was so good at what he did that he really quickly like rise through the rankings at Toei. So, and in particular, there was a couple like famous um, kind of stints that he did, particularly with Digimon and another anime which I actually have never heard of called Our War Game, which ultimately um, ended up getting him noticed by Studio Ghibli. So um, after he kind of garnered this attention, and it was ultimately his dream to work with Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli, he was actually picked to be the director of Howl's Moving Castle, which,
Oh
um,
wow.
yeah, which is super, super famous movie ultimately now. Um, he was picked in 2001. The movie ultimately was scheduled and came out, I think, around 2003. However, things didn't go as he planned at all. Um, he had very specific um, directions for how he wanted the movie to be made. Howl's Moving Castle, in particular, was based on a book. So him and essentially Hayao Miyazaki were both like very very particular about how they wanted the movie to be made, and ultimately because even though he was picked for the movie, ultimately because basically him and Hayao Miyazaki couldn't get along and had too many creative differences,
Hmm.
he ended up leaving Studio Ghibli without making a single film there, even though he had this like ultimate opportunity to essentially work on what eventually became one of the biggest anime movies of all time. So uh,
Right.
pretty interesting to say the least. Um, and that was something actually that prior to me doing research about him, I didn't actually even realize. So it made a lot of sense based on the animation style that he was a fan, obviously. But at the same time, it's pretty shocking that imagine you basically get your dream job and then things don't go like according to plan.
Right.
So
Yeah. And also
yeah,
with working with one of your idols too.
yeah. It's so it's funny, they say what's the saying? Don't meet your
Yeah,
childhood
never meet your
idols.
idols or
Yeah.
don't meet your heroes or something
Don't
like
meet
that.
your
Yeah.
heroes. Yeah, something like that. So that's like a prime definition of that.
Example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after he ended up leaving Studio Ghibli, he ended up going back to Toei, and then he started working on some of the like um, major kind of like animations for them. He also even was starting to do like commercials, like he did an animated commercial for Louis Vuitton, which is pretty cool. He worked on a bunch of One Piece. Him and so in 2004, he ended up meeting his partner, whose name is Yuichiro Saito. Um, he was very, very important because essentially they ended up becoming partners and ultimately opening up eventually their own studio after they kind of worked together, like going forward after 2004. And the original time that they met and worked together was actually on on the intro of one of my most famous and one of my most favorite animes, which is Samurai Champloo. So he actually created the opening for Samurai Champloo um, with his partner, and ultimately they ended up working together on a ton of stuff, which later led to them opening up a studio of their own called Studio Chizu, and ultimately having a ton of success. Um,
And that
he
this movie was released through that studio?
Yeah, so this particular movie was released through that studio. It came
Okay.
later. Um,
Okay.
his kind of first main um, movie that so he ended up leaving Toei to go to another company called Madhouse. Again, another super duper
Oh yeah,
famous.
Madhouse. Yeah.
Uh,
That's
uh,
what the
uh,
one that does One Punch Man, right?
yep, they do a ton of super famous anime. So um, he ended up leaving with his partner essentially to do uh, his first like major directing job. And so what he would do is he would direct, and then his partner ultimately would write the scripts. This is important
Mhm.
because for The Boy and the Beast, it was actually the first movie where he decided to both direct and do the script, and a lot of people were very critical of this script because it didn't have the same level of kind of depth that a lot of his other movies ended up having.
It's
Um,
funny that you mentioned that because it was actually one of my gripes I had with with the
yeah,
film.
a
Actually.
lot of people have a ton of gripes with that because
It's funny,
it's
like I didn't even know about that. So
yeah, and it's funny because if I had to pick any of his other movies, it's not really like that. Especially some of the most famous ones, like The Girl Who Leapt Through Time or Summer
okay.
Wars, which were both done at Madhouse in 2006 and eventually in 2009.
Mhm.
And both of those movies ended up. Actually, I think all of his movies that he's released have ended up winning Japanese Academy Awards. This movie in
You hear
particular
that,
was,
Tony? The
yeah,
Japanese Academy
the
Awards.
Japanese Academy Awards. So every major film
Not
that
the
he's released.
Academy
No,
Awards of
no.
foreign
So
films.
so
Oh,
so this one got considered for an American Academy Award while we're on the topic of
oh
accolades, but
wow. Okay.
yeah, it did actually,
For
but it didn't.
animation.
Yeah, for animation for best
Okay.
animated movie, but it
Very cool.
ultimately didn't get nominated. So it was um it was in the runnings, but it ultimately fell short. And I don't know if he's ever had a movie that's been nominated for an Academy Award or not. He's won lots of the Japanese ones. Obviously, he wins them basically every time he puts them out. But I don't think. Oh, he did. He got nominated for an Oscar in 2019 for his one of his newer movies called Mirai. So so yeah,
Awesome.
that's a little bit about him. Did you guys have any thoughts or any kind of questions?
Well, I was wondering what were the disagreements he had with the other director?
So yeah, so essentially, I mean, it's tough to know, obviously, but essentially, what they kind of said was that he was supposed to get the creative rights to the movie, essentially. So he was supposed to like hold the reins. But actually, something we talked about before in one of the previous podcasts is how Miyazaki is notorious for being extremely picky and like at the end of the day, it's his studio, right? He kind of runs the show. So Hosoda and Miyazaki essentially, from the way they talked about it, were butting heads because Hosoda was basically saying like, I thought I'm the director. I thought I'm the one that gets to direct the movie. I thought it's like my vision, but ultimately, it seems like Miyazaki
He
didn't.
was stepping all over him.
Yeah, and basically from the sounds of things, like they couldn't come to any like agreements, and then ultimately it's
Yeah,
funny because Miyazaki ended up just directing the movie himself.
Right.
So yeah, and
Just to go
yeah,
back on what we were talking about, like we were talking about the saying, like don't meet your heroes or whatever. And I
yeah,
find like it's actually really important that you do because I find that like when you're growing up or you're into a certain thing and you're kind of like idolizing this person, you kind of like want to be them in a way. And it's
yeah.
like only when you meet them that you realize that like I don't actually want to be this person. I just want to be myself. And I find that that's like a big part of this movie as well as kind of that message as well, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's true. Even though this movie kind of happens a little bit later, it's you're not wrong because, and it's kind of funny because for this particular director, he obviously worked his whole life to get into this studio and then got this massive opportunity, and then even though it didn't end up working out for him, as soon as he ended up going back to Studio Toei, and ultimately within a 2 or 3 year period, he ended up basically directing his first major movie, which ultimately won, you know, national
Awards.
awards for him, right? So
So
I would imagine it was a good learning opportunity for him because it essentially helped him to break out to and then later start his own thing.
right. So let's just dive into this lore, basically, or the themes or
Yeah,
the movie.
yeah. So one of the major kind of interesting things about this movie, obviously, is it's very much about fatherhood, right?
Hmm.
So just to provide a little bit of a synopsis about the movie, ultimately, the main character Ren, he goes by a different name based on what the his adoptive father ends up calling him later, Kumatetsu. But he his mom ultimately passes away unexpectedly. Um, these are common themes that ultimately happen in Japan. People, are working way too hard, and and just life in general. These types of things happen. So he's ultimately left in a scenario where he's supposed to be raised by some adoptive parents. Something that you'll notice even in the scene at the very beginning when um, he's like trying to get like when he's trying to like talk to those parents and stuff like that is actually there's a little bit of like symbolism there because if you notice he's like laying on the ground and he's kind of not receptive to a lot of stuff and then they're kind of overarching and they don't have faces and they look almost like ominous and
That's kind
that
of yeah. That's kind of
yeah,
how you feel as a child.
Yeah.
exactly.
Sometimes when people are talking to you, you don't even remember what their faces look
It
like. It's just the overpowering like the voices
it
and
reminded me of
authority.
like Charlie Brown. Like, when the adults talk,
Yeah, yeah,
they don't
Yeah, and
like
it's like
make
all
sense,
squiggly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So one of
They're
the
just
things.
like two different worlds, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So and actually that's kind of what the symbolism was supposed to be. So it's cool that you got that feeling, but a lot of it is like kind of like the pressure of society essentially. It's
Yeah, and
like
I also noticed in the beginning of the film, um, like there's like those two cops that are talking to the girl that's like going away,
yeah,
or like
Running away. Yeah,
not running away, but like they find a girl in the
yeah.
streets and they're like, "Hey, you're too young to like," and it's kind of like like adults are always monitoring you, and also they're like there's shots from like the camera from Shibuya that's like
Hmm.
looking at the like you're always being monitored. It's kind of like adults that are always monitoring like
Yeah, yeah,
children,
yeah.
that
Yeah,
kind
and
of
that
thing.
yeah, and that even is supposed to be like symbolic, almost like to the pressures of society. Like they're always
Exactly,
there,
exactly.
basically,
Yeah.
right? So it's like it's like I don't want to say it's Big Brother or anything, but it's like it's very much like, especially in Japan, there's so many societal pressures. Like the people really have to work hard. They're forced to kind of follow a lot of the same paths just based on the culture. And I think
Hmm.
he does a really good job of kind of like displaying that feeling or information.
Well,
So
also, yeah, also stereotypically on the girl Kede or Kaide.
Kaide, yeah,
Yeah, they her parents are like pressuring her to go to school and she has to study and she has to do well and she's looking for her freedom and she wants to do what she wants to do and that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. Very
yeah,
stereotypical, but yeah, for sure in Japan, the society, the parents and everything,
yeah,
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 they put a lot of pressure.
yeah. So as the obviously what ends up happening is Ren ends up running away from that stuff, and ultimately he finds himself in at the Shibuya crossing. At which point he has a fateful encounter with um, who at the character that ends up kind of being his foster father, and he's essentially accidentally, not so accidentally, led into kind of a fantasy world where humans aren't really welcome because humans can kind of harbor a lot of like kind of negative energies. And then the world itself is full of beasts, and there's a whole lore ultimately with the beasts and stuff like that. So something that's cool about a lot of um, aspects of the movie is there's a ton of symbolism when it comes specifically to things like philosophies of Buddhism. So
I
one
noticed
of the
that as well. Yeah.
yeah, so um, first off, something I forgot to mention is, and one of the reasons actually that Mamoru Hosoda wanted to make this movie is this was the first movie that he made after becoming a father. So he
Yeah.
had a young kid essentially, and one of the themes essentially was kind of like childhood rage, so to speak. I know it's not that's
Mhm.
not like a great definition for it, but essentially it's like the wrath, like even no matter what age, like the wrath of a child can have like an impact on your life essentially. You know what I mean? So, and then at the same time, like even if like you can be anybody, but when you choose to take up the mantle of being a father, essentially, like even if you're no good or you don't know what to do or whatever, if you try your best, you can ultimately like be a good parent, right? And that's obviously the way they try and make Kumatetsu. He's very far from being like a perfect character. In fact, he's very, very imperfect. He's like super loud. He's super obnoxious. He's super short. He's a terrible teacher at the beginning and for a while, anyways. Um, but ultimately, he tries his best and he ends up kind of being a better. Well, he ends up being a better father essentially than the father that um, Ren ends up meeting later. And even though they do eventually develop a relationship, he kind of always holds that foster parent in his heart, which ultimately, as Tony talked about before, ends up being kind of the one of the major themes of the movie. Um,
One of the things I found really funny in this movie was who's Kumatetsu's rival? What's his name?
Yozu?
Yosen.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yosen.
Yozen,
Yozen.
right.
Yeah.
So he's like the polar opposite of
Yeah,
him.
he's like
He's like
Yeah.
he's
well liked
reserved,
and
well mannered, well
respectful,
liked.
and like he has two of the kids. And right away in the beginning of the movie, I noticed it right away. I was like, he should have went on Maury because he is not the father of this kid. Whatever kid this is definitely a human, you know?
Yeah.
And that eventually becomes Ren's rival or Ren's kind of antagonist later on in
Yeah.
the
Yep.
movie.
Yeah.
And I just found that was really funny because like it was quite apparent from the get-go.
Did
And
you
like
catch that, Tony?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Well,
sorry.
I was actually paying attention to other aspects of the movie, but definitely when that child started having fits of rage, I noticed that something was going on.
okay,
But
I noticed he was just a human like right off the bat.
well, I
Like
didn't. I assumed I assumed it was a beast. It just
okay,
like that
okay,
looked like a human,
okay.
but I obviously we found out later he was a human.
Right, yeah.
But I would like to like what one aspect. Yeah, there is the father aspect, which I think um he kind of had like two fathers, but for those I don't know how much what was it 7 8 years he was with Kumatetsu,
Mhm.
and then he started living in the human world a little bit. He found his dad. He was very shy about it. He found his dad, but then out of nowhere he would start like shouting and yelling and being aggressive, right? So
Mhm.
he adopted the behavior of his foster dad, and we adopt the behaviors of our fathers. Like as a child, I was a bit short tempered and everything, and that's because my dad was like that. And after that, what happened was he didn't know who he was. He couldn't find his identity.
Exactly.
Was he like his first dad? Was like his real dad? Was like did he belong in the human world? Did he belong? He was like
He was
torn up. He
lost.
was torn apart. He was
Mhm.
lost. And I don't think that's very foreign, because I think as a teenager, a lot of us were that way, or a lot of people are that way as teenagers, like pressured from your parents. Should I study this? Should I study that? Uh, I feel like running away. I don't know who I am. These are like very common things being a teenager. So even though you said the director, it's like he wrote this after becoming a father, I find there's a lot of aspects of what it's like to be a teenager that exist in this movie.
Yeah, it's a coming of, like I said, it's a coming of age
Yeah, yeah.
film. But I
Yeah.
wanted to touch more again on what Aaron was saying about the themes of Buddhism, because right away in the movie we're introduced to what's it, Kimatetsu?
Oh,
Kumatetsu.
Kumatetsu. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
it. the
Oh
Lord of the
yeah.
Beast world, and right away they introduced the theme of reincarnation right away in
Yeah,
the
you
film
reincarnate as something.
because he's reincarnating as a god and he's trying to
Yeah.
pick which god he can be. And I found that was really interesting too because a lot of kind of growing up and not being lost, it's decision making, right?
Hmm.
And I found that was a very a theme about even for him. He's
Mm.
supposed to be the leader and
Well,
kind of
even the bunny
the
lord, whatever
yeah,
his name
exactly.
is,
He has to make
Yeah.
him
this like
too. He has to decide.
important decision, and he's stuck kind of like he's doing the wise thing of taking his time to kind of figure things out, but he even has to figure things out.
But in the end, the bear, I mean, Komatetsu, he decided. He made his decision.
Yeah, he ends
The
up
bear
stealing. He
from
end up, yeah, he ends up
formerly known.
yeah. The Kumatetsu ends up stealing the guy's like wish basically at the very
Yeah,
end,
he took the
right?
Lord's
Yeah,
wish
yeah,
and he became the reincarnated God, and he
Yeah.
decided to become the sword
the
soul
sword,
or
Yeah,
the
whatever it's
sword,
called.
exactly.
Yeah.
which I find is a very, very fitting symbol, like a symbolism. And I'm sure
And
Aaron,
that goes to show that people who yell at you and and yell all like in this case, he's always fighting and yelling with the boy, with Ren, and it seems like they hate each other and everything, but in the end, no one could have loved him as much as he loved him
yeah.
by doing that sacrifice.
But I feel the symbolism with the sword is it's a really powerful one, especially for fatherhood. And I'm sure Aaron knows about this.
Yeah,
It's
for sure.
because it's ultimately like you're gonna leave this world, and he transforms into a weapon, so he knows that like the kid can defend himself, and he has like
Yeah, and I think
that's what I got from that anyway.
he could
Yeah, you're
communicate,
arming him.
and I think
You're
he's
arming him
yeah,
exactly
but
to
Yeah,
also
take
I
before
on
the
think
worlds. Yeah.
yeah,
exactly to take
I
on
think in the end he was
the
able to
hardships of the
communicate with
world.
him. It
Yeah,
was
definitely too.
yeah,
But I also feel that there's a symbolism
yeah,
there
yeah,
of you're this is the reality, this is the grown-up world now, and you
yeah,
need to have this kind of weapon
yeah.
to defend yourself and to make your way.
Yeah. And
And it's
so one of the cool lines he says actually before he turns into the sword is basically like any small fry, like any basically any small fry, like anybody, you don't have to be like a god or whatever, like anybody can essentially make that decision for their child, right? And like that's kind of that one strikes close to home because he's basically saying like it doesn't matter who you are, like if you're a parent or whatever, you don't have to be whatever, you don't have to be famous, you don't have to be anything. Like this is what you can do for your child to like ultimately
absolutely, yeah,
set them up to be successful.
absolutely,
Um
or just
yeah.
to survive.
Yeah, so yeah, it's
That's
more
the
so for
basic
yeah,
minimum.
yeah. Um
Aaron, how did that did that give you any insights or feelings about your relationship with your son?
yeah, I mean like for me watching the whole movie, so the movie hits for me in a couple different ways because for one, he teaches his son sword fighting and as you guys know, I'm a kendo teacher. So even the fact of how he's trying to teach the kid and he's saying like, oh, like you just do it. It's like that's what you want to say to everybody, right? When you want to say that to your kid when you're teaching them stuff, you want to say that to I want to say that to my kendo students when I'm telling them how to swing or whatever. But in reality, what ends up happening is like you have to find ways to communicate properly in order to like reach different people successfully and ultimately in order to be able to teach you have to work on yourself too. Like teaching is interesting because in order for you to teach you have to be able to do it and then you have to be so good at doing it that you have to be able to break every piece down and explain it, which ultimately makes you better, right? So that that kind of feeling is the feeling that I had watching a lot of the movie. And then obviously like um as the kid grows older and stuff like that and they have like different disagreements and those sorts of things and he's trying to control them but he can't control his kid, like all that stuff. I haven't got there obviously with my son, but I can I can see where it's going. My
I
son's
also
more
like the part where the bear, that's what he calls him, learns something from the kid,
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the footing, yeah,
yeah, the footwork basically like
yeah. He refined his skills because of the child,
exactly,
yeah.
yeah.
Ren.
So
All right,
yeah,
guys. So yeah, go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
yeah, so one of the things that I thought that was cool that I wanted to talk about with a little bit. So Tony, I didn't realize, and TJ, I know you've been to Japan too, but I think all of us have been to or recognize Shibuya Crossing. And something that I think I wanted to ask you guys a little bit was like, was there any like stuff that you recognize being in that area, um, in the Shibuya Crossing? So, and like if you have like what your thoughts were about like that kind of cinematography and that realism.
Well, I don't remember the exact shops and stuff. Actually, when I was there, I'm not even sure if there was a Starbucks. I was there in like 2004. So, but I do remember the crossing, the huge crossing. I do, and I remember how many people were there and the feeling you get when there's like a massive amount of people walking hurriedly around you. And yeah, so yeah, I was able to catch a feeling of that from my time there. Yeah.
Nice. How about you, TJ?
Yeah, like it's one of those places like when I saw it in the animated film, like I was directly transplanted back to that crossing because it's a very unique experience. And it's almost like they obviously recognize that, right? And it's kind of like you're on center stage, kind of like that's the feeling you get when you're there.
Yeah.
I just always remember like seeing Shibuya 109, which is like a famous clothing kind of like tower in Shibuya. But like yeah,
Oh, cool.
obviously there's there's a bunch of stores that are around like famous. It's like basically Times Square, right? But in for Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, for me, I had somewhat recently been to that Starbucks, funny enough, which I wanted to talk about very quickly. But when I saw that Starbucks, I was like, wow, I've been there. Like it's up on the like second floor or whatever, and it's like I don't know
Perfect
that.
view of the crossing. Yeah. It's done on
Yeah,
purpose for sure.
yeah. That location is extremely busy, extremely popular.
It's
But I
the
thought that's
most
cool.
people that crosswalk, I think, in the world. It's like,
Yeah, probably.
yeah,
That Burger King also which I think he highlights a little bit too. There's a big Uniqlo and stuff there too, but that Burger
right.
King is super duper famous there too. Quickly, one of the things I wanted to mention in terms of um, there's a lot of ties. Like obviously the whale at the end of the movie is kind of interesting, but um, there was some like kind of lore or theories or whatever that one of the reasons that he used a whale, obviously there was the tie to Moby Dick, and they, even though they don't directly mention it, they obviously it's the book that he's learning about with Kaide, but also they're near Shibuya, obviously, and there's like that that kind of influence, but also Starbucks is named after um, gets its name essentially from the influence from Moby Dick. So that's there's like kind of some unique ties to that as well. Is obviously there's like a big theme on like whales in the movie, and at the same time, there's like the theme of like the Shibuya crossing and the big Starbucks there. So that was something I thought that was kind of neat and unique that you guys might find interesting. Um,
One thing I want to go ahead, sorry.
oh no, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, one thing I want to mention that I forgot to mention was I didn't get what if there's any reference for the dark energy the humans have, the hole in them and
Oh,
I wonder does that reference
mm.
anything from life or I couldn't get the reference.
I have some thoughts on that, but
Go for it. I don't. I mean, I could maybe make some guesses, but I'm curious what you're thinking, TJ.
well, I just think about it like this, like, and this is like a theme that's like common, very common in a lot of stories and a lot of things. It's basically like the abyss, right? The void. And that's basically people, a lot of the times they have issues and anger and unresolved issues
Mhm.
because they haven't filled that void in their life.
Oh yeah.
And it kind of like it's referenced in games
Yeah.
and I actually believe that actually.
Yeah, because
And
both
mhm,
childs had that confusion and
right, yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
Because they lacked love or they lacked
yeah,
attention or
whatever.
whatever it is they lack in
yeah,
their
and it's
life.
something that animals in general don't have,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So the
true.
animal kingdom doesn't have that, and that's why the animal kingdom says, "Oh, be careful of humans; they have the dark side."
Right, yeah. Because I feel that like I was saying, like the abyss or they or even in Dark Souls games or whatever they call it, like the abyss, right? A lot of this hatred and or this evilness or whatever the case may be, it comes from like this place of void or lacking. Uh so yeah. It's cool. Yeah.
That's cool. Hey TJ, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. Obviously, what were your thoughts on the film? And in particular, we were talking about like the script a little bit.
Yeah,
Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
sure. I mean, I really enjoyed the film, especially the animation style. I found it was really cool. Like I said, I really liked the realism in the still frames and then the kind of like animation that's happening around the still frames. And it kind of was cool that I feel like a lot of concept art was used like for the film, which is you could really tell like it's like because sometimes they make concept arts and then like they kind of like it's kind of close to that. Whereas this film, I really feel they worked really closely with the concept art that they designed, kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um, the only my own like I said, my only gripe about the movie is really like the second half of the film. I found that it was a little bit weak script wise. For me personally, again, this is just my opinion. Just like the that character that Ren is dealing with, like his rival and stuff, like they introduce him,
Yeah,
and I
so you
feel like
kill.
stuff happens very rapidly towards the end. Like I feel like they
Yeah,
because the
it kind of got rushed. It's like
yeah,
one
exactly.
little event happened, and all of a sudden they're mortal enemies, and
Yeah, exactly. It's
they
like
go to a
what
boss
just
battle. They go
happened?
to a boss
yeah,
battle right away.
Like, yeah, exactly. It's like, okay. And I felt like the whole story was like gearing up between the battle between the bear and
yeah.
yeah.
Yozen and
Yeah, I
Kumatetsu, and
find
then
this.
that wasn't even like the main battle
Which
at
is
the
cool.
end.
Like I wouldn't have
Yeah,
minded if they did,
I
honestly.
enjoyed the story, and it was different types of approaches and concepts. But I find it lacked a little bit of subtlety compared to films like Princess Mononoke, because that was my previous anime film that I saw,
Mhm.
and it almost felt like I was I was always I was expecting near the end of the movie for it to get really deep,
Yeah,
for
exactly.
it
Exactly. I
for
know
like,
exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
but it kind of just it was a bit
Fizzled
simplified.
out.
It was kind of like it became like really simplified at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. I know exactly what you're saying. But anyways, that's just my take on it. But I really enjoyed it. I think it's a very solid film.
yeah, very solid.
It's just yeah, I think that it just lacks that oomph, to put it
Yeah,
over the
over
top.
the top, so to speak. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But
yeah,
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 it was a fantastic film, and the animation quality is top notch. Like
Yeah.
wow, there's some
yeah,
instances where you're just like, is this really animated? This looks so good.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so that's about it for me. Any closing thoughts or anything like that?
All right.
Nothing from me really, but I honestly, it was I'm really happy I got the opportunity to talk about this movie, and then ultimately I got, the coolest part obviously is I got the opportunity to share this with you because I think it's maybe a movie that you guys probably wouldn't have seen, and although
Yeah,
um
definitely,
the movie is a little bit simple at times, I think there's a lot of really beautiful aspects of the movie that I was happy
definitely, yeah,
sharing and talking about with you guys. So
definitely.
ultimately, just thank you. I'm happy I got a chance to do it. I was super pumped.
Yeah, thank you for the recommendation. It was really, like I said, it was a pleasant surprise, and it was nice to watch something different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
No.
wanted to say like one last thing. The film also it reminds me a little bit of Where the Wild Things Are. You ever saw that film?
Yeah.
Like just like
Especially with the
going the
beasts.
beasts and everything. Yeah, that's a very common thing. But anyways, that was the last my closing comment for that.
Yeah. Tony, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'm glad I saw it. It was any chance for me to watch good animes is welcome. Thanks for showing it to us. And I still have to think about the ending where the reincarnation of Kuma Tetsu, like what it means and the depth of that. But yeah, that's yeah, I'm satisfied with the movie for sure.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Well, we're gonna close this episode up. So episode 4 and 5 will be available. Check them out. Episode 4, Memento. Episode 5 already, guys. Amazing.
I know.
So yeah, so just stay tuned. We'll have the next episode next week. I'll be picking a movie. You guys just have to stay tuned and buckle up.
Looking forward to
All right, guys. Well, sayonara.
it.